I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
For the recent Season 9 Spring Split Final of the LCS between Team Liquid and TSM, the organisations became a central theme regarding the final. For the historical implications, Team Liquid was looking to become only the second team in North American history to win 3 LCS titles in a row. The team that held that record was, of course, TSM. TSM, the most decorated team in LCS history, had been in every single final from Season 3 through to the end of Season 7, had a down period in Season 8, which still meant making the playoffs, but not making the finals. They were appearing in their 11th LCS final. What an incredible accomplishment, way ahead of any other organisation in the North American region. And you know what? It, as a result, was easy for people to look at that span of time, in fact, the LCS era, and say, this is TSM's success. TSM were the one consistent force that was always there at the top, always making the finals. As if TSM is what caused success. Playing for TSM is what brings you success in your career. That's the essential component. Now, for me, I personally thought the central, more pressing theme narrative for the final was actually the Doublelift versus Bjergsen individual rivalry, like who would become the first to win 6 LCS titles, get the LCS gauntlet, as it were, to play into the Avengers theme at the moment. For me, it was more about Doublelift versus Bjergsen. So actually, this final, when I saw TSM lose it, made me think, what about Bjergsen versus TSM? What about player versus org in terms of who's more significant, who's more relevant, who did more, who made who, as the AC/DC album title went? Well, pre-Bjergsen, okay, TSM was the best North American team in Season 2. They won the majority of the tournaments in the open circuit. They came in LCS, they won the first split, admittedly with some struggle. They weren't necessarily always the best team for the split. They had a player change, kicking out Chaos, bringing in Wild Turtle, who was then their starting AD carry. Yes, they made it through. They won a narrow final, 3-2 over GG University. Okay, all good stuff. They won. They again established themselves as the top team. But then you come to Season 3 summer. Cloud9's by far the most dominant team. TSM, actually, it was a surprise they even made that final. Vulcan were considered a better team than TSM over the split, but TSM held their nerve and won out with maybe some veteran savvy in the semi-finals where Vulcan fell to them. Still, easy win by Cloud9 in the final. At this point in time, Cloud9 was going to be the dominant force, and TSM looked like they weren't going to be a team that really were the dominant team in North America again. But Bjergsen came along, didn't he? Reginald put his ego to one side. He stepped back from the lineup. He brought in this very talented, not actually a rookie at that point in time, but had been a rookie the previous year, talent from Europe who clearly was headed places, but no one knew how far he could go. And he came in and he filled Reginald's spot, and he became immediately one of the best players in the whole LCS, one of the best players in the West pretty quickly. And sure, they lost that first split, Season 4 spring with him, but they still had a very good record in the split. I think they were only one game behind Cloud9's dominant record. They still made it to the finals. They beat out CLG, who looked like they were primed themselves to go on a run to the championship. But Bjergsen and TSM were able to take care of that. Bjergsen particularly played a great series overall against Link and Doublelift. And then he made it to the final. Yes, he lost in convincing fashion to Cloud9, but you already saw that the turnaround was in motion. There was one team left to be able to battle and overcome, and that was a team that required having some team play and having a great player to play around and not just having a good team, because Cloud9 already had more than a good team. So then you come to really Bjergsen's time in TSM. And you look at his time, he was in 7 straight LCS finals. He's played in 8 total out of a possible maximum 10 that he could have appeared in. He won 5 titles over that time period. But if we characterise how those runs were, I've got to say, it isn't that TSM was always one of the absolute elite teams, that they always should have been in every final, and maybe they should have won more than the 5 titles. I actually think that is a disservice, both to the org themselves, where they were as a team, and Bjergsen as an individual great player. Because for me, you look at some of these runs that they had to the finals, some of them, including splits they won, They didn't even have the clear-cut best team in the LCS. In fact, at times they were far from the best team in the LCS. Sometimes they weren't even an elite tier team, and they were still making these finals. It's debatable for many of these splits as to whether they even had the best NA roster, or the best roster man for man, or the most players that they were best in their roles, and yet they were making finals, sometimes even winning the championship. The only connecting thread between all of these final runs, including this splits, is Bjergsen and his individual greatness as a player. His consistently elite tier, world-class, individual, hard carry or supportive team style, whatever it was he needed to do for his team to make them a relevant contender in LCS. He is the relevant factor, not TSM, Team Solo made the black and white, that logo you know, which yes, came along with him for the ride at times, and certainly when he joined the team, it was him joining a bigger team that then put him in position to win. But for me, I think Bjergsen has done more for TSM at this point in time over his history with them than TSM has done for him. So let's look at some of those splits where they made the finals, at times even won, despite not having a top 2 team in the LCS. And we'll go and we'll look at the Gamepedia entries and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So here we go. The first ever split that Bjergsen won with TSM was Season 4 Summer. It was also the one where LoCoDoCo took over as coach, where they initially had Glebe Glabu as their support player. They then kicked him out of the team because he had his own issues. And they'd obviously had Special before that. They'd kicked him out to bring in Glebe and try him out. And eventually they rested on Loco's former, not teammate, but organisation mate, Lost Boy, famously of Blaze, who'd been obviously an OGN champion, and they brought him over, and he became the starting support player. Now, TSM was a team that was in trouble during this split. If you look at this record here, they finished as the 3rd best team overall, but even then, they were 2 whole game wins behind Cloud9 and LMQ, LMQ being the all-Chinese team. This was still the classic Cloud9 team with High and Meteos and Sneaky, Balls and Lemonation. And look at this, Cloud9 ends up far and away the best. Crucially, they have a great set of winning records against every single playoff team. They're tied with TSM though, every team except TSM. Now, you look elsewhere, not only is LMQ ahead of TSM, but LMQ won all 4 regular season games against TSM. In fact, TSM at one point in time, I think it was like 3/4 of the way through the split, famously, they were tied for 2nd place. There was a big tie between a whole bunch of these teams. But TSM was the only team, I don't know if they're the only team, but they had a losing record against all the other top teams. All the teams tied for top 5, top 6 teams in the league. Even by the end of the split, you go and you look here, they had a tied record against Cloud9, okay. Tied record against CLG, a team around their level actually. They had a losing record, every single game lost to LMQ. They had a winning record against Curse. It's the one other playoff team they had a winning record against. And they had a losing record against Dignitas. This is back when you played the 4 best of 1s against each team. So going into this playoffs, they weren't a team expected to win the championship. They weren't a team that should even be making the finals. You go and you look at who they played. First round, they played Dignitas, a team that actually had been at one point in time top of the league earlier on. If we go down to here, look, they were top after week 2, and they were still a top 3 team for most of the split until towards the end they dropped off heavily. Now, in the playoffs, this was a 3-1 series, but for a 4-game series, this was a pretty close one. Game 1 was the one where Zion Spartan did that like crazy backdoor. I think he was playing Nasus, right? And he pushed it down. Game 2, Dignitas was in position to win, but TSM drug it back. TSM then won a close Game 3. Game 4 was the only real blowout game overall. A narrow series overall. Dignitas were in position to potentially beat TSM, but failed to do so. Then they come to the semi-finals. LMQ, the team that had beaten TSM every single time, favoured obviously to win this best of 5 series. LMQ wins Game 1. Again, TSM loses Game 1 of the series. This time, LMQ goes up 2-1 in games. TSM battles back. They win the series 3-2 narrowly. They go to the final. In the final, they're playing Cloud9, the team that had beaten them in terms of TSM, the last 2 LCS finals. But even with this, TSM core with Bjergsen in it had beaten them 3-0 in the spring final. Again, TSM loses the first game of the best of 5 series. Again, TSM goes down 2-1. This time, TSM again comes back to win 3-2. The 5th game was the infamous like triple crit game from Wild Turtle, where Sneaky was unable to turn the team fight. Instead, Wild Turtle won the team fight, and TSM won their first LCS title since Cloud9 had been the LCS, the first LCS title for Bjergsen. And quite frankly, see, even though TSM as a team was certainly a good team at this point in time, you see how many close series they're having here. See how many times they're in losing positions. And quite frankly, look at who they're facing in the mid lane. Shifter, one of the best mid laners at the time. Big time signing for Dignitas. Zhao, arguably an MVP candidate over this. That's why LMQ was so powerful. He was the best player on their team. High, mid laner and legendary shot caller of Cloud9. Still a very important reason as to why they were a vital and relevant team who could have won this LCS split. Obviously, in fact, were the favourites to by the time we got to the playoffs. Instead, TSM not only made the finals, something that on paper they weren't expected to do, but they won the finals. And one of the main reasons why was Bjergsen. He was arguably the best player in the LCS at this point in time. And as a result, they were able to win the split. Then let's go the next year, the summer split. So remember, spring season 5, TSM won it. They'd won the IEM. They were in great form. Famously went to an MSI, bombed out. And after that, they had their struggles in summer. This was another time. I remember watching this one and thinking, this is the one where it happens. Like, this is the one where there's no way TSM's making the final this one. Like, look at this regular split they have. They finished 5th overall, which was their worst ever split finish. They literally were only one game ahead of the last placed playoff team, which is Dignitas. They had an 11-7 record. There were 4 teams with better records. Team Liquid, people forget that one, with Quaz and Piglet, was 13-5, led the league. CLG, this is obviously the event he went on to win this split. This was their first split with Coach Chris, 13-5, great record. Team Impulse, the former LMQ with other players mixed in there, 12-6, still a very strong team. Obviously, they had Rush at this point in time. Gravity with Hortzer was 12-6. Down at lowly 5th place with a 61% win record is TSM. And let's look at the other teams here. So, okay, CLG losing record against. Cloud9 rather, losing record against. CLG winning record against, actually. They were still able to beat them. Then you go Gravity, 1-1 record against. Dignitas, last place team in the playoffs, 1-1 winning record against. TIP, 3rd place, 1-1 winning record against. Team Liquid, 1-1 winning record against. So the only team who were a playoff team that TSM had a winning record against was CLG. And obviously, they actually ended up losing to them anyway. So they crept into the playoffs. And when they're in the playoffs, by the way, Bjergsen hard carrying this team this split. In the playoffs, they first of all played Gravity. They won 3-1. They even lost a game to Gravity. Then they went and they played Team Liquid. They were actually favoured to lose this series. Team Liquid have been a very strong team, particularly with smashing lanes, but they managed to beat Team Liquid. They managed to overcome a much stronger lineup on paper, better players man for man. They go to the final. In the final, they were already supposed to have lost in the semi-finals, but in the final, they play CLG. They get swept 3-0. People remember it for the story of CLG winning in Madison Square Garden and Hotshot beating Reginald and Doublelift winning his first title, Aframu getting a championship, the Rough bot lane dominating. What people forget is, first of all, TSM had no business being here based on their regular split, based on their lineup where Dyrus was mad washed up, Santorin was having confidence issues, Lost Boy had probably reached the end of his time in terms of like the positives of having him as a player versus the inability to have fluent communication at all point in times and potentially bring a shot caller into that role. This is when Bjergsen still had to carry the burden of shot calling and being the best player of the team and being the lane that had to win every time. They had no business being in this final, so people might look at it as a failure of Bjergsen. It's not. It's a failure of TSM's. This is a success of Bjergsen's that he got them all the way to this final. And in fact, even in this final, he did his best to potentially win the series. When, I think it was game 1 was the one where they put Yasuo onto Darshan, former Zion Spartan, on CLG, and there's nothing that TSM could fucking do about this. This was where I think he played Yasuo into Gnar and showed it to be a strong counter if you're a good top laner. And so they knew in TSM, we're in trouble. We either have to waste a ban on Yasuo or we have to take it from him. So who was the player who took it from him? Sure as fuck wasn't Dyrus. It was Bjergsen who took it in the mid lane and tried to play it and tried to make the draft still tenable for TSM. It wasn't a tenable draft. CLG was a better team over this split. They were a better team overall. They were a better team man for man when you look at that lineup now. That was the one that had Darshan, Xmithy, Poor Belter, Afro Moo, Doublelift. That'd still be a pretty good lineup now with the exception of Darshan. That's still a pretty fucking fire lineup, right, if you put in the LCS now. So TSM, that's no diss whatsoever to Bjergsen that he lost that final. If anything, that's like his faker Season 7 run, getting them all the way to the final Worlds for my money. There's one last, well, 2 more I guess we're going to look at here. So we're going to look at Season 6 Spring now. So remember, Season 6 Spring, is where they've brought in Yellow Star and Doublelift. So they've got Haunts at the top lane and Svenskeb. So they only kept Bjergsen, is after the last one we're talking about. They've retooled, they've made a superstar lineup, a super team. This looks incredible, but obviously they had the coaching issues with Casey Woodbuck. They then went to Parth for a while, who's supposed to be the analyst, but had to take over as coach. And they had their worst ever split. They finished 6th place. They narrowly made playoffs with 9-9 record. And if you go and ask Old Optic Gaming about that, 9-9 doesn't always make you make the playoffs. So they were lucky to even make the playoffs with this superstar lineup. Obviously, you go and you look, they'd had times where they were like tied for 3rd, but they're way down here. Then the best, they're tied for 2nd in week 2. Oh my God, they're going up, but then they go all the way back down again. In the last week, week 9, they're on a 9-9 record, 6th place, down 2 spots. If there'd have been another week, they might not even have made the playoffs. Then you look at their record against teams that are in the playoffs. So against Cloud9, they're 1-1. Against CLG, they're 1-1. Against Immortals, who are dominating the league, they're 0-2. Against NRG, they're 0-2, despite the fact that NRG's a 9-9 team. And against Team Liquid, they're 1-1. So winning record against nobody in the playoffs. Losing record against teams like NRG and Immortals. Immortals is way above them. Immortals literally has won 8 games more than TSM has. CLG has won 4 games more. Cloud9 has won 3 games more. Team Liquid's won a game more. Like, this is the Team Liquid that had all the rookies. It had Lolo and Dardoch and Matt in the lineup, and they're finishing ahead of TSM. This was a split where TSM barely made the playoffs, and they had no business going anywhere near the final. Sure, the lineup did. On paper, the lineup looks amazing, but their actual form and ability as a team at this point in time was disastrous. But what happens in this playoffs? Well, they play Cloud9 first of all. Cloud9, pretty good fucking team, right? Cloud9's a team where people should have expected them to be in the finals. No, TSM wins 3-1. Then they go to the semi-final. By the way, for anyone wondering, that was big time Bjergsen. This was one where Jensen was in peak form. He was looking really fucking strong. Cloud9 was supposed to be the better team. They had the better players man for man. Admittedly, yes, the name value on TSM is amazing, but in terms of what they put in the server, as a team, Cloud9 was a better team at this point in time. But this was Bjergsen, big time carrying this series. Then they go to the semi-finals. Because of reseeding, they play Immortals. Now, Immortals, I told you, they got 17-1. They were gods. They were literally winning record against every team except CLG. This isn't supposed to be TSM going to the finals. There's another split where TSM's supposed to get stopped in the semis. They 3-0 Immortals. They go to the finals and they lose another final to CLG. This time 3-2. Okay, very, very close one. Yeah, fair enough. That all makes sense. Problem here is, despite losing this final, Bjergsen played fucking great. The way he played in this final, in many other finals, would not only have his team win the final, he'd be the MVP. I even think after the way this final played out, he might still have been the MVP of the final, even though he lost. He played great. In fact, him and Doublelift played a great series overall. Even in some of the losing games, they played very high-level individual League of Legends. The problem is, they just weren't able to beat CLG. This was, for whatever reason, a miraculous, inspired run by CLG, who themselves hadn't been that great a team, and CLG managed to win the split. Fair enough. Again, in terms of how the team had actually played that split, TSM had no business being in this final, probably should even have gone out in the quarterfinals to Cloud9, but Bjergsen ensured that didn't happen, and then him and Doublelift got them to the final and had them this close to winning an actual LCS title, one that by all rights shouldn't really have been theirs. Now let's go to this last split, shall we? So at the end of the split, TSM was one of the strongest teams. Look, they were even one game behind top spot and finished 3rd overall. But that doesn't really tell the story of their split, does it? Because look, they started off 1-1, then 2-2, then 2-4. So after week 3, they were tied for last place in the league. They then go ahead and win. Look, they finished the split with 5 losses. They had 4 losses after week 3. They lose 1 game out of the next, what would that be? 11. So 12. They lose 1 out of the next 12 games. They win 11 games. And who was a major reason for that? Well, despite what the player of the game tells you, it was Bjergsen. That's why many people had Bjergsen as the MVP of the split. JDubs won it in the end. Overall, I would edge it JDubs. But Bjergsen was absolutely second best. He was an amazing player this split. And again, he is a major reason his team made the playoff finals. Because, okay, against Echo Fox, yes, they were obviously meant to win this one 3-1. They did. They then played Cloud9. by all rights, they were supposed to lose this one at Cloud9. Cloud9 had a better roster man for man. Cloud9 had a better roster overall. Cloud9 had their own MVP candidate in Licorice. Cloud9 was a very strong team this split. And Cloud9 went up 2-0. TSM came back. They won the last 3 games. Bjergsen was a massive factor as to why. He was the best player over the whole series. He was the main reason they were able to win this series. Broken Blade certainly played a part. And they went to the finals and played Team Liquid. Now, they went up 2-0 against Team Liquid. Even that wasn't supposed to be able to happen. A lot of people had Team Liquid winning this final in predictions. They then lost the series. Overall, Bjergsen probably slightly maybe got outplayed by Jensen. Wasn't really the defining factor. There was a lot of other factors there. But again, TSM, by all rights, probably shouldn't have been in the final. The fact that they came this close to winning is actually quite impressive. And Bjergsen had a great split overall. So the lineups pre-double lift were pretty much Bjergsen. Yeah, they had good players elsewhere. Val Turtle at one point in time was a pretty good player. Lost Boy, obviously, in Season 4 was a very good support player. Dyrus had his times where he could still be relevant, and obviously he could obviously play a good low econ game. The junglers were up and down. Bjergsen was the clear best player at his position, though. He was the clear best player in terms of TSM players in the LCS, one of the best Western players, MVP candidate pretty much every split. Almost very few splits you could really say he shouldn't have been the MVP. Very, very strong player. But I think it gets taken for granted that mid was supposed to be the best lane in TSM. That Bjergsen had to be an MVP candidate every split to get them to these finals. That with bad lineups, he could show legendary performances, he could shot call, he could carry, he could individually outplay, he could carry in team fights, he could switch it up and pull out an assassin and blow the game apart, he could play a mage and play supportive, faker-esque and cover weaknesses of his teammates. It was building around Bjergsen that made TSM great again, not just having Bjergsen and then having all these other great players cause they're TSM. I don't buy that. Like, look at what Bjergsen brought. He brought great individual skills. He brought amazing consistency split after split. He brought the pedigree of being a great individual player and a champion. He brought the work ethic that if you join his team, you know he's always going to work hard. That is incredibly attractive to free agents. As the years went on, the gap of what TSM could offer you monetarily, the gap of what they could offer you in terms of fame and a platform, Cloud9, another option, Team Liquid could eventually offer you just as much or more else around the team, but they didn't have Bjergsen, did they? That was the main reason you joined TSM, not just because it's TSM. There's other teams in anything more attractive because the fan base are a little bit less nuts. They're not going to be as harsh on you overall if you're in Cloud9 and Team Liquid as they are if you're in TSM, right? So, yes, you know what? Overall, I'll make the statement again. I think overall, TSM are more blessed to have had Bjergsen than Bjergsen is blessed to have played on TSM at this point in time in terms of who's contributed what to whose success overall. So it's not that you shouldn't criticise Bjergsen or ever be critical of him. You should. In fact, TSM fans weren't enough in the past. But realise that Bjergsen basically is TSM now. He is the talismanic player. He is the carry player. He is the franchise face of the team that brings them back to relevance, that keeps them relevant when they shouldn't be, and that makes them champions when they have the pieces to be champions. And one day, this guy better have a fucking statue for him somewhere outside a TSM office or stadium, whatever there may be in the future, because it was more Bjergsen than it was TSM for my money. This video was generously supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Butt Pounder 420, JDubs, Chi Mao, Daniel Olivar, Jiangheng Lu, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Alexander Rao, and as always, a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Now, do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my work? Maybe you want to ask me a question for my monthly AMA. Do you want teasers for who the guests are on my upcoming content? Maybe you want to take part in a monthly esports discussion with yours truly. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.